Hello, friends. This is the School of Self-Worth. Welcome back. I'm your host, Nicole Song. And today you get to be on the inside of such a groundbreaking conversation with author Elisa Stad. She is the author of the children's book, Mama's Love Language. And I just, first of all, loved the book, which is about the experience of a child having a biracial upbringing with her Asian mom and her white dad, which is very similar to Elisa's experience. And then also really just what inspired her to write the book and to share that story. And I found just everything about the conversation to be so deep and compelling and expansive. So I just love it. So make sure you listen to that piece of it. And then I also really think about, the growth of our country. And one of the fastest growing populations are people who identify as biracial. So whether you know someone who's biracial or you are biracial yourself, there's so much to explore and to learn here today. So make sure to stay tuned in for this incredible episode. And if you are a high-achieving Asian American woman who wants to manifest a promotion in 60 days while working 20% fewer hours, DM promotion to me on Instagram at Nicole Song. I've got something there for you. All right, friends, let's get rolling on this expansive and amazing conversation. Elisa, thank you so much for coming on to the School of Self-Worth. I'm so glad to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Nicole. Can't wait to have a conversation together.
Yeah, and there's so many good things to talk about. I really want to talk about your book. And what I want to dig into first is really the journey to getting to this book, which I know is probably an extensive one, but I would love to hear a little bit more about like how you got to this place, and especially in that container and context of self-worth, because that's really what we focus on in the podcast. And I love hearing people's journeys to getting to where they are in that journey with self-worth. So I'd love to hear, even from the very beginning, whatever feels right for you.
Okay. Love to share. I think my book talks about this little girl named Jade who understands her parents and herself through their experiences being from two different parts of the world. And that story is very similar to mine, where I have a father who is American Caucasian and a mother who is Vietnamese Chinese with a very, very strong accent. And that's how I grew up. And I really felt as a kid that I didn't have a clear identity, because when I was with my Asian family, they talked about how tall I was and how I looked American, and how, my nose is not as flat, and all these details. And then with my American family, it was much more formal, we sat down in a dinner table with like napkins on our lap and very, a little more serious conversation. So from my childhood, understanding, how to navigate, I felt I was more of a chameleon than really understanding my own self-worth and like my worthiness. I think as a kid, I was very, very shy. I didn't talk so much. I was very observant. Think part of it is because I had to observe to know how to react in a certain situation. And I fast forward, not only were my parents from two different parts of the world, we moved around quite a lot. We started in LA, there, and then we moved to where my family existed, an external family, and moved to Hong Kong, where I went to British school, and I think I even had a British accent, but I was living in Asia, but I felt I was more known as being American, right? So with an American parents, and not necessarily fitting in there either. But afterwards we moved to San Francisco, and then from San Francisco to Idaho, which is also in the Pacific Northwest. And really there were no children in my classes that really mirrored me. I don't think there was one, maybe there was one Asian person in my class, but there's no African Americans, maybe one Hispanic. It was, I felt kind of not included in terms of how I looked and how, I existed. Like I said, my mother, 5'2", very strong accent, and living in Idaho of all places. So I think my upbringing really defined me of really wanting to understand my self-worth, I think I had different phases in my life where I just spent time really understanding it. I think my first one was when I moved to California for college, and I noticed that there were more people that mirrored me, that it was interesting, and people that looked like me could be beautiful and have more to offer, and to be able to speak another language is a value to a community. The other piece was, um, being in that environment, but also, in a university where there was a lot of segregation in terms of groups. I still felt I was trying to navigate where do I stand in all of it. And usually where I was, I still was never like every single person, but it allowed me to really want to discover. And I went to Hong Kong, and I worked there, and then as an intern, and I was like literally one of the only. I was up in Qingdao, Shandong province in China. I think I was one of like five um, interns. I was the only one that was not full Asian. So of course, I stand out there, but I really felt this affinity to my Asian side because living in the United States, it was a little more, I guess the word is like exotic, interesting. The foods. I really, I remember I'd go and like eat pho, and I didn't tell anyone about it because I was embarrassed that it looked weird. Now it's very cool to have pho and things like that. But growing up, I mean, my mom would get loads of jackfruit and all these different kinds of canned goods, and we'd have them stored in our house. And it was not something I was proud to share at a young age. But my discovery of oneself, I would say it was in college, kind of saying, wow, it's actually okay to be from two different worlds. And then it continued in my career when I also went back to Asia, and I worked there as an adult. And I realized it was a superpower to be able to speak to different demographics of people, whether it was the locals and speaking in Cantonese, being on the mainland, or on Hong Kong Island with the expats. I was able to build a connection with different people based on my own life experience and empathy for others. And I think the final piece, which we can talk about with the book, was motherhood. I think it's big for a lot of women, and truly understanding my own. I guess it was, the friction between my mother and I, and maybe part of it was because I didn't feel really comfortable about being Chinese growing up, and how she was different than other parents. But also, how does she get involved as I parent my own kids, and like how do I want to parent my own kids? So this book, I've been thinking about writing a book, I think since I was 15, but the story came about really when I started having kids. And I was flying back from Asia because I go back and forth for work. And I just, I wanted to tell the story that I needed to hear as a child.
Mm.
And in speaking about self-worth, I mean, like I said, I was very, very shy as a kid. I was very observant. And now I'm like trying to open up my voice to share what it's like. So hopefully, give support to other young people who have parents that may have an accent. They don't have to be Asian. It could be anything, or a parent that maybe is more hard-headed, and one that's a little more soft-spoken. And how does that work? And at the end of the day, this book was written because I think all parents love their kids, and I wanted to share that with youth.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing your story. There are so many things that I related to personally, also, like as you were talking about it. And I think there's always like that experience whenever you are born into the United States and you're different coloring and you have different backgrounds. Like, how do you navigate that? And then it sounds like for you, and it's based on also what I read within the book, which is Mama's Love Language, around for you that it was happening within your home, right? Because there was your dad who was probably reflecting a lot of the school culture. And then there was your mom who was like, had an accent and was like cooking foods that people thought were weird and doing all of those things. And then you navigating both of those worlds. And to me, I feel like that's a very common experience in general for like any child of immigrants. Like, how do you navigate two worlds? But you were doing it within one home, which is what I really saw in the
Mhm.
book. Yeah, and I'm curious for you, right? So then you spent a lot of time in Asia as well. Like, it sounds like, did it get worse there or more intense sometimes to be over there? And then looking, I always felt this when I've been in Asia too. They're like, you're like weird. You look like us, but you're American. And it's like, it's strange sometimes, the experience over there.
Yeah, actually, yes, in Asia, they're very direct, which
Right.
I guess I'm used to with my Asian mom
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
family. Very direct in saying, like, what they think you look like or how much money do you make, and very, very, very direct. Um, I actually felt more acceptance living in Asia than I did probably in the US because um, I never took it personally. Because I just was like, oh yeah, that's like what my aunt would say to me. And I just brush it off. Um, but yeah, but they would definitely say, oh, you don't really fit in here. Where in the US, I felt like they're trying to make everyone fit in, but I didn't fit in. So
Mm.
no one was saying anything. I just felt it. So I think it was a little clearer. And I think that stage in my life, I mean, when I was younger, we lived in Asia a couple times as a child, and else I did as an adult a couple times. But when I worked there, I think this idea of like self-worth, because I was promoted and I had a job there, I felt I was worthy to be there, and I felt very honored in a sense. Um, so I think my self-worth in a sense like expanded slightly, like cracked, going there as an adult, and started my career out there.
That's fascinating. That's really cool. And then you were saying, so I loved hearing that part. And then for you, obviously, it changed again having children. And I'm curious if you could get into that a little bit more. Like, was it you were feeling challenged for feeling worthy? Like, what came up for you with having kids?
Yeah, I think my mother, she raised me in a certain way, very strict. I mean, you read the book, so it's pretty much pretty close. It was just about going to school, getting like checking the box, like making sure you're eating your food, making sure you're healthy, and that's it. There was no like coddling or I love you or um, it's okay, you tried your best kind of thing. So um, I think that that piece with my mom really as a parent, I have three young kids now, but when I had my first, my second, as my personally my Chinese mother would say is like, you should do this, you should do that with a wagging finger and stuff. And I think it was difficult because there are things I appreciate from my childhood, and there's some things that I just did not want to do. I didn't want to beat my kids with a stick. I did not want
Hmm.
to yell. But the kids don't have the fear that I had as a kid, but maybe my kids are more not as disciplined as I was. But it caused me to kind of reflect, like, what kind of life, we always talk about generational trauma and passing on from especially from the mother to the child. And I've been doing a lot of work on this in my own like spiritual practice, and just reading and parent books and all that, is like, what do I want to carry with me and what do I want to toss out? And I think when your parent is criticizing you about being a parent, you get very you take it personally. And I felt a lot of judgment and a lot of shame in terms of the feedback I got from my mom. Like, what I wanted her to say is like, I'm proud of you, and it's just not in her wheelhouse. And I remember being very upset, like, for years, I think, until I wrote this book. But kept it inside. And I realized that after writing this book, and it came as I wrote the book, that she doesn't need to say it. It's just, it's accepted. Like, she does, and not just this mom in the book, or not just my mother, but many, many parents show their love in different ways. Um, and that kind of pivoted my understanding of my worthiness, and realized, like, hey, this is just how it is. And I have to embrace where I come from. And this molded who I am today. And I'm going to give what I can, but not have resentment and carry that with me. Um, so, I mean, no one does it perfect. Like, every generation's different. The situations are different. My mother came from the Vietnam War. She was a refugee. she's a lot of trauma and fear in her upbringing. So I think she carried it to me about, finishing everything on my plate, making sure I got I appreciate going to school because she couldn't finish school herself. And even though I knew it, I think writing this book helped me release and understand as I wrote and created this piece.
I've been thinking about this one a lot recently with parents who've been through so much trauma because I feel like I wouldn't say it's universal, but a lot of us who were raised in the US had parents who experienced war. And so some pretty significant traumas in their childhood or at some point in their lives. Like my parents, my dad, like they fled the mainland to Hong Kong like in 1949 and then had lots of trauma from that experience when he was really young.
Mhm.
And then my mom is Taiwanese. And so then, Japan occupied Taiwan when she was a kid. And like she had a lot of older siblings who spoke only Japanese until they were like, in school until their teenage years. So there's just like all of this background. And it's so interesting because, when you're a kid, you hear all those stories growing up, but you don't understand the trauma itself. Like, because you're just like, oh, whatever. Like, that's just mom and dad's stories about their childhood. And then you get to be older and then you're like, oh, wow, there's just like, that is a lot. Like, I'm not a child of war myself personally, right?
Mhm.
Like, I live in the United States. There's wars happening around the world, but within our own country, I haven't had that experience. And so it's really fascinating, I think, as an adult to start to reflect on that and start to recognize, like, and not that our parents are necessarily going to go through therapy now. Like, I don't expect my parents to do that, but it's more like, wow, like I can have so much compassion for that because like I just have no idea how hard that must have been to grow up that way. So I don't know that I was getting that when you were
Yes, no,
speaking, but
I
I've been thinking about
definitely
that a
resonate.
lot. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, that's why I love I know a lot of your work, you focus on AAPI and women. And
Mhm.
it's just, I think culturally we're taught to just like put our head down and get it done. And like my mother and probably your mother and your parents, yeah, I mean, to think about there were bombs outside your house that you had escaped your life. I mean, I think my mom came here and she was like 27 and she had to get a new name, like an American name,
Totally.
and
Yeah.
she barely spoke English and get a job. And, and she's one of 12 kids. So it is very traumatic. And I think when I see the rest of my immigrant family, there's still trauma they carry. My mother's done okay in comparison, but a lot of them are still, even though they had a chance to go into the public school system and do high school, because I think they felt outcasted in a way.
Mhm.
I think they were enclosed in the Salvation Army. They, had accents. So they never really assimilated. And so they're in these communities in Los Angeles, in East LA, and they never really broke out. So their English still isn't great. They don't, they work in factory jobs. So that stuff really makes me very sad that hasn't turned for the entire family. But I think it takes each generation, like I'm the next generation, and to make the step forward and hopefully bring everyone with me. But um, yeah, it's not easy just the American dream, just snap and wake up and go get a PhD somewhere. It doesn't happen. And I think a lot of the times I felt there was a stereotype that all Asians were super smart and super successful, and they're not. They're regular human beings. And like I said, I mean, I have a uncle who the youngest of the 12 became a doctor, and the others work in factories that are like literally, I'm sure there were like illegal factories at one time getting cash, and I was like, this is so sad. Or getting hourly wage at the age all the way working in the system until 65, but like never really got a raise because you work minimum wage. So it's it's all this stuff that our generation is carrying. And I love that there's more opportunities for voices and stories to be told, and we're starting to see it in the media and in the arts. And I'm excited for it to continue.
Yeah, and I feel like it's just important too, like as we're as adults, and like I love how motherhood helped you see this more. And I feel like it's just been work that I've done over the years that has helped me see that from my parents. And just being like, oh, like how can I be more compassionate about the way that they raised us? And some of it's cultural and some of it's from that experience in their childhood and whatever it is. Or then also, like my mom also came over when she was 27. And I always think about that. I'm like, you move to a new country where you don't really speak the language and you have to change everything and live there for the rest of your life. Like that just seems wild when you really think about it, right? Like it's just how dramatic and intense that must be. And I'm like, I don't feel like I have, I mean, I'm sure I would have the tenacity to do it if that was what was required of me or was the choice that I made. But anyways, I always think about stuff like that with my parents because it's just, it's so much, right? And then here we are, we're like these American kids who are just like, do, like everything's always been fine our whole lives.
Yeah.
And it's just it's such a different experience. And that contrast, I think sometimes when you're a kid, you don't understand it. And then you get older and you think about it and you're like, wow, that's really big. So thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
piece.
No, thank you too, because I think we, like you said, we don't understand, like we hear the story, the trauma, and you're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But the problem is what mirrors around us are these, American families that didn't come from war. They didn't get separated from their families. They had food at their table. So
Mhm.
it's hard to put those two pieces together because your neighbors all look happy having their life, but then you have a mother screaming at you about getting your homework done. So, but now as becoming a mother, you understand where it comes from. It
Mhm.
comes from a good place. The delivery may be different, but it comes from love.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I always felt that too when you were saying that. I was like, oh, it's just like love languages. Like my mom is totally like a service love language as well. Like they didn't tell me they loved me until well into college, I'm pretty sure. And so, and like I think for a lot of other families, they're like, that's your parents didn't tell you they loved you. And I was like, they really didn't. They really didn't. But everything was good though, like they always were home for dinner. Like my mom cooked every meal. Like there was like a lot of love in a totally different way. And as an adult, I've just, now they'll say I love you because I'm always telling them that. So they just now say it too. So it's become the way we do things. But it's like,
You're changing the way
yeah, but like they also, I get it, like I feel love from them in a lot of different ways. And I've had to see it, it's just like with partnership, you have to see it. You're like, oh, well, they're doing an acts of service, and I'm a person who likes to verbalize it. And then we can all come together around those things. I'm so curious, and for you, like, what was that thing that prompted you to write the book? Like, what got you in that place of like a book and a children's book specifically?
So I have been obsessed with like different cultures since I was young because especially minority cultures, like I was interested in the Native Americans. We learned about it in fourth grade and, these minority communities. And I think the story um, of allowing these unseen like voices and iconic. Well, like when I was a kid, I think the only Asian American woman that I remember being like, wow, is like Connie Chung.
Oh
Like
yeah,
that
I
was,
just saw
there
her
weren't really a lot
speak.
of
Yeah.
like Asian actresses or anything. So, but so I just thought, hey, my kids are growing up there. My kids are mixed race, and I want them to have something they can identify with. Since they were born, I would teach about Lunar New Year to their
Mhm.
classes from like preschool to even to this day. And I realized when I moved here to Santa Barbara, there were many kids that have never heard of Lunar New Year, had never had a dumpling, had never seen a red envelope, don't like had no idea because they're not exposed to it. So I originally wanted to write a book about Lunar New Year and all that kind of stuff, but I was like, what's my story that I could share to these children? And so it just evolved as, this young girl and the different ways her mother shows her love and her kind of realizing her identity. And like I said, it came to me because I was going back and forth to Hong Kong, back to San Francisco every year. And I was like, you know what? I have such a superpower that I can connect with both worlds. When I go to Hong Kong, I love it because I speak Cantonese. I'm like with the aunties. I'm negotiating on the streets. I can go to all the local restaurants that all the expats can't go. But then I can do all the, the fancy tourist stuff as well. And my world is so broad and so big now that I wish I could share with others. And so I thought, wow, I wish that little Elisa would have known this when she was a young kid. And so it really follows along with the self-worth of starting that at a young age, and then sharing that story to hopefully inspire or even just have a conversation. Just it's not even to inspire. I think books allow you to have a dialogue. And I think if I had this book and I was reading it with my mother, um, I'd probably be reading it to her, but it's at least through pictures and through the story, it causes the child and parent or educator and parent to have a conversation.
Yeah, I really got that. I liked how, I haven't had the experience, right? Because both my parents are Chinese, of having one parent who's white and one parent who's Asian. And so I really loved what you shared in there because I was like, oh, this is so fascinating that, I think all kids struggle with this experience of belonging. And then I really felt like the book illustrated so well that experience of having that split within the house, right? Like how do we find that belonging? And then what was it like for you, like the self-worth of like writing and publishing a children's book?
Oh, good question. Um, well, before that, I want to say it's so beautiful when after I wrote this book, because I did a bunch of events during AAPI month and in San Francisco, there's a couple big schools there and we had a big assembly. And I realized being mixed race is one of the biggest growing demographics there are. If you think about it, is almost like a race, multicultural, multiracial. So this journey of writing the book, okay, writing, as you know, any artist, it's difficult to put your story out there. Of course, I had a lot of insecurity. I had written it maybe 5 years before I published it, back and forth. I've edited it like 40 times. um, and I was very nervous. I mean, I felt good about it. I love the story, but I was very nervous. I remember the day before it was published, just like, what is everyone going to think about me? Because it really is, what you write is me, right? It's not just like a company I'm working for and that's their product. This is me and this is my story. And so um, I was very yeah, I was very anxious and very nervous before. And um, I think, I don't know if you heard this story, but my kids were the ones that were encouraging me to like push it to the end. My son, who I think he was 10 at the time, he's like, what happened to that book, mom? Because I wrote it and I showed it to them during COVID, and we would talk. I wrote it out and thought about it, and even before it, my son would like ask me what's going on with that book. It's a really good book, and I said, oh, it is. I don't know, but once it was really sweet because like his school teachers would talk to me like, hey, I heard you wrote a book. And I'm like, what? And he was just the pride of my kids, that I was writing a book and that I was going to publish it. They were beaming and I didn't notice because I was just doing it, but I didn't really. And then once I heard about that, I'm like, okay, I have to make sure this actually happens. So, um, and then I think I remember my son, the day I got published, and everyone knew about the friends and family, and Ethan came to me, he's like, Mom, I'm really proud of you. So I
Mm.
was like that. I mean, that's the reason to write the book and talk about self-worth. I think when it goes full circle, when I'm like, this story is talking about mother-child relationship, and then I'm doing that in my own life, in real life, it was just very fulfilling. So, and writing a book, I think there's lots of books out there in everyone's heads, of course. It's getting out there. And so we talk about artist block, writer's block, but you need something to keep you moving so you can complete the task. And it's not a task. If you have a mission behind it, if you really believe, because for me, it wasn't just about writing a book. It was about, similar to what you're doing, is like opening this dialogue for conversations around being multiracial. For me, that's what I'm really passionate about because that's how I grew up. And I think there's a lot of work happening in companies now with DEI and um, all this focus on AAPI and really recognizing everyone as they are. So this is really just a tool for me to continue those conversations.
Well, I love that story about your son. Like, so beautiful. And I can only imagine for you, you're just like, oh, like it was all worth it, like all the challenge of writing this book when he said that. Yeah, and I agree too. Like, I feel like it does address like this whole growing group of people, which is multiracial, right? Mixed race. And
Mhm.
just beautiful too for you to be like, okay, like I'm really going to put my own story out there, which I have books too. So it's like a very vulnerable act every time you do it. It doesn't matter how many times to put yourself out there in the world. it requires a different level of being like, all right, I'm going to be just confident that people are going to receive this story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I cried after once, I got all the feedback from everyone in the reviews and people, reading it and saying they cried when they read. It was very rewarding. And I always thought I was going to write it and just go hide in a hole and not like deal with people.
Yeah.
But you have, as you know, because you're an author, you have to go out there and go to bookstores and go to
Mhm.
connect with the community and read your book and talk about it and promote it. And that takes a lot of energy. But I realize those are the times I feel the biggest return on investment because I can have these conversations with my readers and the parents um, about how they felt about the book or what were they what part were they were interested in, like what why can't the cashier understand Jade's mom? Why? I'm like, because they never had that experience, or so I think I really encourage anyone out there, if you have any, and like you don't need to be identified as an artist. You just go and do it. It's your story if that's what you feel called to. But I think there's different ways that we all express ourselves, and I'm happy that we have books to share.
Totally. Yeah. I'm curious, have you read it to your mom? Has your mom read it?
Oh, so good question. So I had it. It was like the author like pre-published copy, and she read it. She didn't know I was going to publish it.
Mm.
She's like, pretty good. You should publish it. And then I said, okay. And my sister, I don't know. My sister said nothing because my
Mm.
sisters, I don't know, they're not. I don't, they're just. That's a whole other another book. Okay, but they so when it's published, they I think they were talking to some of their friends in like their workout community, like, and then one of these women who was like a Caucasian woman, it's like, you must be really proud of your daughter. And then she said, oh yeah, I am proud. So then she never told me, but she told my sister, who told me that she's really proud. So it's like still not there. And then I invited them to one of the readings I've done with um, kids, or I think there was like 40 kids in the room, and I read it out loud and we talked about it. And it was so funny. My dad's there, he's beaming, he's glowing, he's so proud. You could feel it. I'm really proud of you, sweetheart. My mom, as I read it, she is not looking at me. She's just looking around the room. Like, I
Mhm.
think she can't deal with the emotion.
Mm.
So I think that was her love language. She she feels it, but she can't express it directly. So
Yeah.
I finally got it sort of from her, which has been awesome. And I don't know, maybe that's what I've been searching for. Maybe I wrote it for for them to say I'm proud, but no, it's been good, and I think she really is
I mean, she is. She said it's your sister. So
proud. It's like a telephone game in our family.
I relate to that as well. Yeah. That's beautiful. I mean, I love that she read it and she would, it sounds like she is so very proud of you, even if she may not be articulating it that way directly. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw one of my we were at a family reunion, and my aunt was talking about the book, and she's like, it took your mother 40 years to hug me. And she thought, oh, maybe she doesn't like me. But after she read my book, she understood that's just
Mm.
how she is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So sweet. Well, I love that it could come back around that way, like how cool. And that is breaking generational cycles, right? To be able to put the story out there and for your mom to start to open up a little bit more towards you. So, so
yes,
lovely. Well,
yes,
Lisa, what a beautiful conversation. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions to
yes.
close it out? Okay. They're
Good.
simple, they're easy, but they're fun. What was the last thing that you watched on television?
I haven't even watched TV. I think with my kids, watched Young Sheldon. Do you
I
know?
don't know it, but that doesn't mean
It's like
is
a
it good?
series. Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay.
Amazing. Awesome. Okay, and then what's on your nightstand?
My nightstand is a book called *Sapiens*.
I've heard of it actually. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
The
Okay, great.
development.
Yeah. 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 And then what was the last time you tried something new and what was it?
I tried jazzercise which is new for me. I think they've been doing this since 1970s, 3 weeks ago at a gym with a bunch of 70-year-old and 60-year-old women. It was really fun.
It's
The women
fun.
were really happy. Yes.
That's awesome. That's so fun. I've done jazzercise. It's really fun. Amazing. Okay, and the last one is, what are your top three most used emojis on your phone?
It's the happy face and the red heart.
A red heart.
Yes.
Okay, amazing. Awesome. Well, Elisa, what a joy to meet you, connect with you this way, hear your story. Thank you for being so generous with your story. And then what's the best way for people to reach you or to also get your book?
So you can get my book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, anywhere where books are sold. And I have an Instagram. It's at Mama's Love Language, one word. And I have a website, elisastad.com. And you can
Awesome.
get more information about me. There's a newsletter on there. You can learn more about Asian culture and educating your kids on multiracial families.
Beautiful. Thank you. And we'll also link all of that in the show notes as well, everyone. Elisa, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. It was such a joy to connect with you and then to get the word out on Mama's Love Language.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It was a pleasure.